Okay, so we're going to look at this task about the leap year, and I'm just going to write the algorithm for this. So the first thing to do is to decide on a identifier name for the year. So I'm going to make that a year, and it will be an integer. So I want to deal with the integer. Now I'm going to use a Boolean for my determination. Okay, so I'm going to set that to false. So I want to know if it's true or false with the leap year or not. So that's fine, and I'll set that to a Boolean. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some questions and just try and work out whether to turn that to true or not. Starting off as false, can I make it true? So my first question is must be divisible by 4. Okay, if I look in here, then the first question is it must be divisible by 4. So that's the first question I'm going to ask. So if I'm going to say if year, okay, now I could say if it's divisible by 4, I'm going to use mod. Sorry, my typing. If year mod 4 equals 0, then, okay, that's my first question. Now, if that's true, I need to ask another question. I'm following my sentence, unless it is a century. So I need to ask whether or not this is a century. So if it's a century, it must be divisible by 400. Okay, so and that's the second bit here. So I'm going to ask that question. So is it a century? So a century is divisible by 100. So if it's divisible by 100 equals 0, then I'm using mod. Remember, mod gives me a remainder. If there's no remainder, then it's okay. So if it's divisible by 4 and it's a century, then I want to be able to say, I want to be able to now ask if it's divisible by 400. Okay, then it must be true. So I'm going to say leap becomes, sorry, I don't want the capital L, leap becomes true. Okay, if it's not divisible by 400, then nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay as false, so I'll just keep that leap as false. And if it's not a leap year, sorry, if it's not a century, then automatically it's already divisible by 4, but it's not century, so then leap must be true as well. Okay, so there are two instances where leap is true, and that's if it's divisible by 4 but it's not century, but if it is a century, then it's got to be divisible by 400, which is what we put. End if, and then if it's not divisible by 400, I don't need an else, I can just say end if. Okay, so I set leap to false to start with, and I've taken 2 opportunities to turn it to true. So the only times it can turn to true is if it's divisible by 4 and it's a century, and if it's divisible by 400, then leap is true. Or if it's divisible by 4 and it's not a century, so an else on the century, then it still must be a leap year, but it's not a century, but it's divisible by 4, so that's okay. And then in my output, I'm just going to put down here if leap, then, so if leap is true, then output leap year, can't spell, otherwise else output not a leap year. And then an end if on that. Okay, so there's my algorithm, nice and tidy. Remember, I've just got input year, there's no prompts in here or anything like that, just keep it clean and tidy. So that's the algorithm, and that would get you 6 marks for that.